Good morning, everyone. I see you joining our call. We're just giving a couple of minutes for everyone to join us. All right, I'm going to get us started. Welcome, everyone, to Helping Schools Be Better with the Building Electrification Roadmap. My name is Susan Harris. I'm a communications manager with New Buildings Institute, and I'm here to help with some tech support, and I'm going to mention a few housekeeping items just to be aware of. We are recording this webinar, and we will send out a link to this recording as well as other resources later on. If you hover your mouse over the lower portion of your screen, you'll see that there are a few items that you can use. You'll see that there is chat. We encourage you to chat with each other. If you have a question for any of our panelists, please put that question in the Q&A section. That helps us keep track of questions, and then we'll try to make sure we answer as many as possible. So again, thank you for joining us. And with that, I'll hand the microphone over to our very own Riley Loveland.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are. I'm Riley Loveland. I'm an associate director here at New Buildings Institute. We are so happy you're here today. I already see comments in the Q&A and in the chat about how relevant this will be to you. So I love that. Bring the enthusiasm today. We want to thank Southern California Edison, SCE, and 2050 partners for the support in completing this research and the accompanying report. A couple of other things before we kick off. Like Sue said, please use the Q&A function for questions and feel free to use the chat to keep the conversation going during the webinar. This is the last time you'll hear from me until the end, so I'll be monitoring that and can probably respond as needed. We're also experiencing some website issues over here at NBI this week, so the report itself will be made available as soon as we can. We'll be sure to follow up in an email once it's available, and in the email too, we'll have that link to the slides, the presentation, on the dashboard that we'll talk about. So we'll give you all the information. Just hold tight, listen in, and if you have any questions that come up, let us know. Next slide, please. So just in case you're tuning into an NBI webinar for the first time, NBI, New Buildings Institute, we're a national nonprofit, and we think of ourselves like a think tank that for over 25 years has been striving to decarbonize the built environment. Next slide. All right, so we have an amazing set of panelists today who will do a much better job of introducing themselves than I will. So I'm going to pass it off to them. And Misha, I'm going to have you go first.
Thanks, Riley. Hi, I'm Misha Egolf. I'm a technical associate here at NBI. I'm on our building innovation team. My background is in environmental engineering. I love data and analysis, and I've been here for about 2 years and excited to be a part of this project. Shannon?
Morning, afternoon, everyone. Shannon Oliver here, senior project manager at New Buildings Institute. I've just been here about 7 weeks now. I came from the school's environment as a sustainability manager for about 8 years, and kind of come from the implementation side. So happy to chat with you all about that today. And go ahead, Reese.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Reese Davis, a technical consultant with Refocus. We helped out with some of the technical and costing aspects of this report. I have a background in electrification pathways and codes and standards. And I'll do just a brief introduction on our team as well. Go to the next slide. Resource Refocus is a small firm with a lot of experience in building science and zero net energy and zero carbon planning for projects and programs and policies.
All right, I think I'm up. I'm going to give y'all a brief overview, some context about why we're talking about this today before handing it off to Reese to get into the nitty gritty. So, you know, schools are an important part of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions nationally. In California, K-12 schools emit over 1 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. And in terms of, you know, where that is coming from, we have a snapshot on the right here. This is specifically for schools in SCE territory, since SCE was our gracious funder on this project. So what you can see here is lighting and plug loads, which is already electric, is a big chunk, but then there's also heating, cooling, and ventilation. So HVAC is another major component. And Shannon, if you want to click one more time, just want to also call out that most of the existing heating systems in California schools are fired by gas. In SCE territory specifically, so this chart we're looking at here, 94% of heating emissions are coming from on-site gas. So we can think about that as we move into this presentation, thinking about you know, where the gas currently is in schools, because your fuel choice is definitely going to impact your carbon emissions. Natural gas is going to have different emissions than other things like, I mean, even propane or fuel oil, other fuels, but also electricity. And so if we go to the next slide, this is particularly important in California, or interesting at least, because in California, they are moving the electric grid towards 100% renewables. So that cleaner electric grid means that you're going to have much lower emissions as compared to gas, right? So in 2021, over half of California's electric grid was sourced from some form of renewables. But then also thinking about specific times of day, this little screenshot on the left side, there are actually some times in California where renewables, so predominantly solar in California, right, is covering more than 100% of the load actually on the grid at that given time. So at that point, there's, you know, this is totally clean. You know, the idea is zero emissions. Maybe that's not totally true, but, you know, very, very low emissions, especially compared to other fuel sources. So that's why this is so important. Okay, so we've kind of taken this like big grid view, but bring it back down to the building level. What is an all-electric school? You know, simply it has no on-site combustion, right? So we see things in this graphic like a heat pump water heater, an all-electric kitchen. But there are a few other things I want to point out. So in a perfect world, you know, an all-electric school would first implement energy efficiency measures like reflective roofs, energy efficient windows, and LED lighting to decrease the overall energy needs of the building. Once you've assessed that overall use and brought it down as much as you can, then you can start transitioning your mechanical systems to electric options, because you don't want to be buying oversized equipment to cover a load that, you know, you could easily get rid of with these other measures, right? And then you can use on-site solar and storage to help keep the operating costs down. One other thing I want to call out here is the efficiency of the electric equipment you choose definitely matters. While, for example, an electric resistance water heater is electric, its efficiency is barely better than a gas-fired water heater in most cases. So, you know, just keep that in mind, especially with water heating, heat pump water heaters. For space conditioning equipment, heat pumps, so that could be air source or geothermal. We'll get more into that later, but just kind of keep that in mind. And also keep in mind the controllability of the equipment. So most new equipment comes standard with this, but you want to make sure that you're able to participate in utility programs that can help keep your operating costs down. Okay, so how do you actually do all of this? We suggest this getting to zero over time approach, which is a long-term strategic approach to energy management. It's not a fancy program where you have to check a lot of boxes or anything. It's just really trying to think about leveraging every natural opportunity in a building's life cycle to improve performance and reduce emissions. Taking this kind of longer term view can help you all achieve your carbon neutral goals in a way that is cost effective and aligns with the overarching goals of your district. And we offer more guidance about this. If this sounds really interesting to you, we have our decarbonization roadmap guide, which is available on our website, which is currently down right now, but we'll be back soon. So encourage you to check that out. But yeah, that is not why we're here today. Today, we are here to talk about the BETR Building Electrification Technology Roadmap for schools. And the goal of this is to provide high-level guidance on for decision makers that want to electrify their school buildings. So we have a cost analysis of electric technologies that can replace traditional equipment commonly used in schools in a variety of building life cycle event kind of situations. So we'll talk about that next. And so we have the report itself. And then, as Riley mentioned, we'll also have a interactive dashboard where you can actually, select drop-down menus and things like that to understand the costs. So that link will also be shared with you. Okay, so I mentioned these events in the building life cycle, right? So for the purpose of this project, we categorize things into 4 scenarios to align with those kind of events. Each scenario has a different goal, which is going to dictate the most appropriate electric equipment to choose in that situation. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but just know that there's you can think about it like emergency replacement and then a variety of different planned replacements. And so Shannon, if you click one more time, I just want to emphasize the importance of being proactive. Emergency replacement is one of our scenarios, but it is the least conducive to electrification. So we do want to avoid that as much as possible. Okay, so then we also recognize that every school building is unique, but for the purposes of this report, we needed to categorize buildings into some different kind of representative types. And so we have large, small, and relocatable. They're primarily dictated by the size of the building in square feet, that's the SF. And then there's also some characteristics on the back end, like how many tons of cooling we assume that building needs, how many zones, whether or not it has a gymnasium. So Reese has all the details on that, which we are not going to go into today, but is in the report. So just keep that in mind as we go through this and you see some of the information that Reese goes over. Okay, so then also just wanted to note that we have all of the equipment recommendations split out into different end use categories. So the information that we're providing here is not exhaustive. We're not going to give you every potential space conditioning and ventilation option. We are trying to compare select electric replacement technologies with baseline equipment with similar operating characteristics to provide the closest like-for-like replacement scenario, particularly in these 5 areas. And just to give you an example of what that actually might look like for HVAC equipment, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, the best electric option is going to depend on your baseline equipment. So some of you might have a ducted heating system. So you might want to look at a 240 volt air source heat pump. If you have a ductless heating system and it's really small, maybe you could get away with a package terminal heat pump or a ductless mini split system. So just kind of keep this in mind again as Reese goes through more detailed information about the equipment. Just understanding where you're starting and the equipment that you actually have in your space is important to then figure out what electric equipment is going to work for you. So with that, I will hand it off to you, Reese, to go into more detail.
Awesome. Thanks, Misha. Yeah, I think I will kind of give now a little bit of what I'm going to call like a teaser trailer to the full report, and kind of try to talk through some of the questions we asked of each of the electrification technologies and how we kind of tried to answer them. And then I will walk through some of the results and then direct you to the report to take a look yourselves. So first, as Misha mentioned, we need to kind of talk about what scenarios are these different electrification technologies feasible. Obviously, we want to avoid, emergency replacement where possible, just because there's some existing systems that really don't have an appropriate, emergency replacement electrification option. And there's some systems that have, more efficient but maybe higher upfront cost options that for deep efficiency retrofits really make the most sense. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about what electrification technologies are appropriate in which building types. Obviously, the HVAC system in a modular classroom is going to look very different than the HVAC system in a large school building with a gym and commercial kitchen. And then upfront cost is going to be really the driver or the barrier to a lot of these installations. So we'll talk through kind of the magnitudes of these costs, how we landed there, and how you can use the cost results that we have. And we'll also talk about potential installation challenges that can be identified ahead of time. That might be electrical service upgrades, that might be more design reviews, or just existing system challenges. But we want to highlight that things that might drive upfront costs, as well as lead times for these designs. Obviously, operational impacts such as energy costs, greenhouse gas emissions are a big part of why you'd want to do an electrification upgrade. We're not going to be able to really hammer down on exact cost to benefit ratio, just because these systems are really specific to their implementation and based on the existing system. It's hard to say exactly how much energy will be saved, but based on just general system efficiencies, we can make some qualitative descriptions of how these systems will impact the operational costs. And then finally, we want to talk about. I'll just say we want to talk about kind of the potential air quality impacts that you'll see from these systems and how electrification retrofits can improve the indoor air quality in schools. We can jump. For costs, we wanted to gather as many costs of these systems as possible from kind of standard cost aggregators such as RS Means, but where we had more novel or kind of less standard systems, we looked to state and utility cost reports, surveys, and research, and then where necessary and available, also just referenced equipment retailers and online wholesalers. We thought it was important to really, include realistic labor rates. So, prevailing wages in Southern California, because again, this study was done under the umbrella of SoCal Edison's help. So we wanted to focus on rates there. So labor are included in these costs. And we wanted to normalize it by building area and kind of create a range of costs so that building decision makers can kind of look at these costs as a starting point and get an idea of magnitude of where their project costs might land, and then be able to go from there and focus in on some more specific technologies. Go to next slide. For the installation considerations, as I mentioned, kind of the first thing you're going to think about is the system going to require an upgrade to the existing electrical service, so panels, transformers, wiring, and if not, what existing infrastructure can you use? Can you use the wiring that's in place for the old system? Can you use the piping that runs throughout the building? Can you use the VAV boxes and ducts, or will you need to replace or remove them? Are these systems more or less complex and have a lot of moving parts and components that might need to be maintained or commissioned? And then more specific potential barriers, such as if you're putting something on a roof, is a DSA review required? Just things that can really increase costs and increase lead times. And some of these aren't going to be avoidable, but the earlier you plan ahead, the more realistic costs you can determine for these projects. Next slide. As I said, the operation considerations, energy use and energy costs are going to be hard to get an exact estimate for. It depends a lot on the existing system. It depends on the installation. It depends on just operation and occupational variables that are hard to pin down beforehand. But based on system efficiencies and typical designs, existing research, we can estimate the qualitative impacts of these technologies relative to the existing systems and to the alternative electrification options, as you'll see. And then, finally, air quality considerations. I think it's a known issue that in a lot of schools, schools just don't have the air quality levels that they need for healthy, indoor learning environments. And electrification retrofits can be part of that solution, sometimes in more direct ways, such as removing indoor gas combustion directly by replacing it with electric alternatives, such replacing gas stove with an electric induction stove. And then there's, if you're touching the ventilation system or you're touching any part of the HVAC system, you might as well, go in and retrofit the ventilation system to bring in more outside air and improve air quality in that way. So we've included those options in our electrification technology packages. So for the next few slides, I'm going to go through the results that are shown in the report. And again, I just want to, I'm not going to go through every single cell in these matrices, but just want to direct you to the report and kind of talk about how you can read these charts and what they mean. So you can see on the left-hand side, we've got a list of electrification technologies and packages. In this slide, it's for space heating electrification. And, these include, the costs here include, as I said, labor and equipment, but they do not necessarily include more tangential systems such as the service upgrades that might be needed, or, replacing the whole duct or piping systems that might be related or used by the system. On those upfront cost ranges, again, you can kind of think of these as magnitudes of upfront costs. These aren't incremental costs; these are just the straight first costs. And we just want to give an idea, a starting point for folks thinking about making these electrification upgrades. And then would encourage folks to go do a little bit more, planning and research to get to an exact number for their school. But the next four columns, the scenarios, as Misha described them, we've got that emergency replacement scenario, which we're really trying to avoid. There are some electrification solutions that can go in there, but rarely are they the most efficient option. And so in general, we're really hoping to encourage folks to get into that deep efficiency retrofit column where a lot of these, where the best systems are really available. So those, you can see the single zone and multi-zone, mini split and multi-split heat pumps with the dedicated outdoor air system. That's really kind of, best in class for efficiency, also for air quality. And so that's what you'll find in that deep efficiency retrofit scenario. For the building type, the three columns that represent building types, obviously these are generalizations. Every school has its own needs and its own existing systems, but we just wanted to include this to kind of help decision makers focus in on a few different technologies. A big, large high school, 100,000 square foot high school is not going to be using packaged terminal heat pumps for their HVAC needs. So we just wanted to help decision makers focus in on the right technologies. On the utility cost impact columns, in general, we're trying to only present options that will, lower utility costs for schools, because I think that's a big potential benefit of these electrification systems, is that they are, the most efficient option available. In a few cases, and you can see on the air to water hydronic heat pump as an example, just due to the nature of the system that's replacing, the gas boiler in most cases, it's really the only technology available to replace that system as kind of a plug into the old piping system. And often just due to the nature of the temperatures that the water needs to get to and the potential use for electric resistance backup, there are cases where you are going to see an increase in utility costs. So we just wanted to flag that, although there certainly are ways to mitigate those utility cost increases. But it just takes a little bit more planning, and there is just a little more potential for barriers on those systems. On the benefit side, these are, best understood using the legend on the left, the low, medium, high. So, for each column, we've, got a range of benefits. And so, just walking through these on the ease of maintenance side, a low rating there might mean a system that has a lot of components that require commissioning, that require, constant replacement or maintenance. And on the high benefit side, it's, systems that really only need to be touched a few times throughout their lifetime and in general are pretty easy. On ease of install, a low ease of install would mean a lot of, potential for service upgrades, a lot of potential for, design reviews and external systems needing to be upgraded. Whereas the high side is really a plug and play system that can go right into, replacing the old system without much trouble. Indoor air quality improvement potential is, what systems are being replaced and are there, really steps taken to improve the indoor air quality, and, especially talking about that dedicated outdoor air system that would bring in 100% outdoor air, replacing just an older HVAC system is really likely to see a real improvement in indoor air quality. And then finally, greenhouse gas emission reduction, where we're really looking at how much fossil fuel is being displaced by these systems. And so, the most efficient systems that are replacing, high capacity gas systems are going to have the highest benefit there. And then, for the heat pump options, we also want folks to consider whether there's a low global warming potential refrigerant option available. And not all cases are there. Hopefully one day there will be, but this is just the industry as it stands now. So we just wanted to include that option there. So, again, I'm not going to walk through each of these results, but I wanted to show just a way to read these charts and what they mean. And I'm happy to answer questions later about any specifics. So Shannon, if you can move to the next slide. I'll move through these pretty quickly, but I just want to highlight one thing here, which is the difference between the 120 volt and 240 volt heat pump water heater option. For lower capacity water heating needs in schools, the 120 volt option can be really great. It has a lower upfront cost typically, and because it is just 120 volt, it can go into any standard wall outlet, and so really is good for those emergency replacement cases and has that high ease of install. And one other thing I'll just mention is similar to the hydronic heat pump on the previous slide, the central heat pump water heater is really the only electrification system available for those really large water heating capacity needs. And there are significant barriers to its installation, just in terms of system design. So we really encourage folks that are going to look at that system to plan ahead. So move to the next slide. Cooking electrification, obviously each system is every kitchen is going to be different. It's a pretty custom situation when you're looking at electrification retrofits for these kitchens, but we've just included kind of two scenarios here. One kind of full-scale electric commercial kitchen where you're going to have multiple burners, multiple ovens, a lot of custom equipment like fryers, broilers, potentially even woks. So that's where you're seeing such a high upfront cost range there. And also because some of these systems are pretty high capacity and have high power draws, there may be wiring replacements that are required. So often in cases it's not going to be an easy emergency replacement option, and it will require a little bit more planning. Whereas a small countertop kitchen, if in a smaller school where you just have a couple of burners, maybe a warming oven, these are readily available electric technology options that are pretty low cost, and can go in pretty much any scenario. So yeah, we can move to the next slide. Not every school is thinking much about laundry or maybe even has laundry, and some schools have really high capacity laundry needs with more commercial scale options, and those electrification systems are kind of just getting to scale and not quite really at the point they need to be for cost and effectiveness. So what we've included here is just the heat pump dryer, which come in 120 volt and 240 volt options. And just wanted to flag that for low capacity laundry needs, it's a really great low cost, low power draw option that we'd encourage folks to look at, but we can move here. And so finally, last technology that we're looking at is EV charging. And we have it for school buses, which is obviously a big concern for schools, but we also wanted to include the EV chargers for passenger vehicles as more folks are driving EVs these days. And, I think a big element of these chargers is their indoor air quality improvement potential. And you wouldn't necessarily think about it, but the exhaust that is being displaced by the EV chargers, especially for school buses, where they might be idling in the parking lot, and getting into the indoor ventilation systems, there's definitely a huge indoor air quality improvement potential from replacing those school buses with electric vehicle school buses. And then on this slide, I've also included service panel and distribution transformer upgrades, and just so that decision makers have an idea of what the costs might be when those are needed to be upgraded. So we've included that for reference as well. And finally, just to summarize, I make a plan. It's the best way. The best outcomes are going to come from planning in advance, identifying hurdles that you might need to overcome, and that'll lead to the best, most efficient, lowest first cost, and best indoor air quality benefits for schools. HVAC replacements are always going to have the biggest role to play in this, so definitely start that planning process early. Kind of identify your options for replacement. In general, heat pumps always going to be the most efficient option. Low global warming potential refrigerants are going to be the best for your greenhouse gas emission life cycles. Really, if that's available, we definitely recommend going with it. Energy SAR is great at identifying your efficient equipment options for other systems. As I said, this is a great opportunity to identify areas where the retrofits can support air quality improvements. It's definitely a great opportunity for schools. And then, if you are going to have to do an electrical panel or transformer upgrade for your retrofit, think about future electrification retrofits you might have to do in other systems. And just, again, it's part of planning ahead. You can really mitigate a lot of costs later down the line if you plan ahead. I'm going to pass it over to Shannon now, who's going to talk a little bit more about how to use this report and these results.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Reese and Misha. So that was a lot of really good, deep, technical information about the report and some of these electrification choices. So I'm going to kind of pull us back out a little bit and think about how you all out in schools and districts can help make decisions around selecting these options, right? Helping your organizations and recognizing that there's oftentimes a lot of stakeholders involved in that decision process. And so one of the first things, just to, again, sort of start at a high level to think about is this idea of decisions are made by people, right? At the end of the day, there's going to be maybe even a small group of people that are going to say, yeah, let's do this electrification project, or no, we don't want to do it for whatever reason. And so recognizing where your district and where your district leaders are on this kind of curve of diffusion of innovation. If you're not familiar with it, you can look it up. It's a behavioral model in public health and other sectors. But really, it's the idea that we all have a tendency to or a willingness to adapt to change, right? And in this instance, it's probably in that sort of technology space. But really, it can be anything, right? You may be very willing to try out new foods, but you're not ready to buy a new EV car yet because there's just different risk perceptions that kind of tie into making those decisions and making those changes, as an individual. And these get brought to work, right? We don't leave those at home when we go to work. And so as you have leaders or decision makers in the room that have a varying degree of perhaps even just basic building science or certainly some of the more technical components of deciding for an electrification project, they're going to bring that to the table. And so you really want to think about what is motivating them, right? Are they motivated kind of by their head? This is the right decision to do for XYZ reason. Maybe there's an upcoming code that we know we need to comply with. So let's just get going now. Are they motivated by their heart, right? They believe in the climate situation we all have, and they want to do their part or do the district's part to kind of move the needle there. Or are they motivated by wallet, right? Is this going to be a purely economic decision for them? And that's really going to help you sort of message this proposition to those folks, you know, when you get the opportunity to be at the table. And so, you know, one of the things, I got a few examples I kind of want to talk through where these sort of individual behaviors can be beneficial or potential barriers to making these decisions to move forward. And it kind of ties back to the idea that risk perception, you know, drives behaviors. And one great example when from my time when I was in a school district was we were looking at adding a rooftop solar array to an existing building. Obviously had a lot of stakeholders, a lot of questions to answer about how this was going to be done. And we had our lead electrician at the time who was kind of having some resistance to the idea. And he'd been, you know, fairly progressive in other areas. It was always like, hey, let's do a VFD over here, or let's get those LEDs swapped out in some creative ways. And so it was a little surprising to hear some resistance on this solar idea. And I kind of pulled him aside and said, you know, what's the hesitancy here? And he dove into this like, oh, I don't know if, you know, the economics are real or what it's going to do to the roof. And it really felt like it was coming kind of from this personal space of he wasn't sure, you know, if he would do maybe solar at his house. And I sort of had to back him up and say, look, this is a, you know, multi-stakeholder project, and, you know, not to be insensitive, but what it does to the roof isn't your concern as an electrician, right? We want you to tell us from an electrical standpoint, you know, are we making the right decisions? And so he ended up kind of coming around and admitting like maybe his big hesitance was, you know, this felt like one more thing on his team's plate to maintain. And I said, well, that's a very valid concern. Let's talk about, you know, including a few years of operations maintenance on the front end contract to make sure you can kind of ease your guys into you know, maintaining the system comfortably. And then another example you might think about is that like individual sort of, you know, risk perception versus, you know, the organizational risk perception. And again, this was, you know, for my time in schools, we were working on a whole new greenfield, brand new K development. We set goals on the front end. We wanted to be, you know, collaborative for high performance school certified. We wanted to have a target EUI of like 25. And so we were going to have to kind of do some certain things to get there. And we had a lot of great work happening with our architect and mechanical engineers and a lot of folks. And kind of partway down the path, our lead plumber at the time was like, hey, I really want to go, you know, point of use, on demand, electric, water, heat, and avoid running all that copper pipe all over the building, which seemed like could be a good option, right? Cost wise, might save some money on the copper pipe, might cost a little more on some of the units. But at the end of the day, the design specifications that we had and that we were referencing for this project for the district didn't really have that kind of equipment called out. So our lead architects and our lead, you know, senior construction project managers had concern about speccing this equipment that we kind of hadn't worked with yet, and we were already, you know, midstream down the path. So it was sort of this organizational decision. Well, let's just stick with the gas, you know, the gas-fired water heat that we know how to spec right now. And then, you know, the last one I'll kind of talk about is this idea of you know, internal versus external behaviors and abilities to adopt these kinds of projects. And the example here is about a project we were doing that was a large multi-school LED upgrade, and you know, working with the contractor and kind of getting pretty far down the path of you know, design, about 90% construction design drawings, and we realized they had spec'd type E LED lights, which is where you direct wire, you know, the electricity to the light tube itself, which we did not do those in our district. We didn't feel that was a safe way to do it, and so we kind of had to go back to the table. Ended up being essentially a change order to go to some type A LEDs. And so that ended up costing a lot of money, cost us some time constraints. And it was, again, the contractor just sort of doing what they knew and what they wanted to price out the best way they kind of thought for the project versus kind of what our standards were in the district. So you might be kind of thinking, what are we talking about all this, you know, behavior change for? And really the point of this is that you need to be prepared, right? And that's really what this report can help you with. There's going to be a lot of pretty technical questions from folks that maybe don't have as much background in this space around, you know, the equipment itself and is it the right, you know, system for the system you're trying to replace. And so you really want to be able to do your homework, which this report can help with, to say, yes, you know, we're replacing a central boiler plant. You know, here are our electrification options, and here's the things that we all need to consider as a team as we're going through this. And you need to be clear and concise, right? There's probably not a lot of time that's going to be allowed to discuss this new technology as you're doing this design process. It may be, one item on a dozens of things that need to be discussed in that 1 hour that you have the decision makers in the room. So again, use this report, be very prepared and clear and concise, and be able to deliver that like refined message of, this is the way we think we can go to do electrification, and these are the reasons why, and let them sort of, come back at you with what other remaining questions they may have. And then the last thing here is I doubt that these kinds of conversations kind of happen once, right? You're not just, hey, let's do a whole new heat pump system, and people are like, cool, yeah, let's go, right? There's probably going to be multiple meetings with multiple different folks. Maybe someone missed the first meeting, and so they want to back up and recover all of their own individual concerns. And so you want to make sure that you're consistent and persistent. And again, that's where this report can help prepare you for those talking points, prepare you for that information. So we did want to show a couple kind of examples and considering some of the upcoming investment tax credit money that will be available to schools. And we can happy to talk more about that separately during Q&A if folks have questions. But we wanted to bring in so within the report, there are a few specific scenarios that we called out, kind of spotlighting, example cases where you might, in this case we're shown here, have a large school that needs HVAC replacement, right? So you can kind of see the assumed existing equipment there on the left and the sort of the proposed electrified equipment there on the right. And again, as Reese mentioned when he was speaking, sometimes these options may in fact cost more on the front end, right? And that's sort of where we are right now, but it's important for you all to think about and again be prepared to talk about as you're making these decisions. And one key piece to that is to think about the idea of the incremental cost, right? If you're needing to replace an HVAC system, you're gonna have to buy some equipment. So consider that baseline cost, which is that existing system kind of top line there. That's money you're going to spend one way or the other. So it's almost, no need to think about that in the sense of decision making for cost, right? You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to find that money. The proposed electrification cost is a bit more there on that second line, but really the incremental cost is that third line. And once you apply a kind of assumed ITC credit, again, we're not tax advisors. This is just a scenario, look into these specifically. Every case is a little different. But if you assume for this particular project that baseline 30% kind of rebate tax credit from the ITC, you really bring that adjusted incremental cost down to that final number there, which is still, a chunk of change. But it's at that point where you can have those internal conversations around, is there justification for this added cost, right? Again, is there a code compliance scenario coming down where you're going to need to do this anyways? Do you have, district or regional goals that you're trying to achieve on energy use or carbon reduction that can sort of allow for this? And similarly, this is upfront cost. So you may be able to do a life cycle cost analysis with your architect and, mechanical engineers to think about how this may impact your utility cost, your maintenance cost, and some of those other things that should be rolled in and considered with these large system replacements. Another quick example here is a small school has just a hot water heater they're looking to replace, a 50-gal gas-fired water heater with either a 120 volt or 240 volt, kind of depending on what your setup is like and what your needs are there. And again, similar breakdown, existing system replacement costs, you're going to have to buy a hot water heater to replace it regardless. So why not compare that to the costs for some electrified options? We've assumed a 40% credit here because it's kind of one piece of equipment, and you may get that additional 10% from the American-made standards that allows for that extra 10% there. And so in this case, you could actually save a little money post investment tax credit versus the kind of standard replacement option, or may cost you a slight bit there. So ultimately, take-home message is it can be cost neutral, even if the upfront cost may be more by utilizing that investment tax credit. So those are just a couple quick examples. I think we've thrown a lot of information at you all. I see that there's hopefully quite a few questions we can jump onto. Did want to just do a quick shout out. Thank you to Southern California Edison for funding this effort and helping you all think about school decarbonization, school electrification. That's great that we're all looking at this and thinking towards the future. And then one last quick plug in this space. The U.S. Department of Energy has an upcoming webinar next week. That is for the Efficient and Healthy Schools campaign, sort of aligning the efforts of school building efficiency, things like electrification, along with those environmental and health benefits that can be seen from that work. So if you're all interested in that, you'll again receive these slides and can follow the link there to get registered. So with that, a big thank you from us at NBI and Resource Refocus, and we will jump into questions.
That's where I come back. All right, we do have a series of questions, so I'm going to try and direct them to who I think should start to answer them. And then if anybody wants to chime in, I say go for it. So Reese, why is the package terminal heat pump efficiency greenhouse gas reduction lower than the mini split?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think gets into that, the way that we kind of devise that column. Just generally, the mini splits are often replacing a slightly larger gas system. So we're kind of taking into account the quantity of, fossil fuels displaced, kind of along with the efficiency of those systems. So that's kind of my short answer. That we're trying to, that the package terminal heat pump is usually replacing a smaller system.
Well, and I might add that also in a lot of cases, it's replacing electric, like package terminal AC that's already electric, right? Versus the mini split might be replacing like a gas furnace.
Yep, exactly.
Great. All right. Hopefully that answered the question. If you still have additional questions on top of that, feel free to just drop them in the chat or back in the Q&A and I'll cycle it back through. All right, this is a big one that Shannon, I'm going to start with you and then we'll see if anybody else wants to add to it. So how can sustainability advocates influence school construction managers that have their own negative perceptions of all electric buildings? Such individuals generally cite issues with resiliency, such as electric grid outages, lack of space for sufficient battery backup, anecdotal evidence of horror stories of all electric buildings like leaking refrigerant, system maintenance performed by general custodial staff that lack expertise, etc. This is a two-parter too, so we're going to start there and then we'll move on.
That's such an easy question to answer. It's on the nose though, right? That as I was speaking to this idea of behaviors and risk perceptions, they exist, and kind of wherever they come from, is what it is. But it's our job to kind of work through those. And I think, the best place to start is to really try to get at the heart of what the concern is. And that rooftop solar array project I mentioned, actually one of the biggest barriers that kept coming up was this idea that everyone was like, oh, so I've heard that solar panels can be vandalized. And I'm like, our schools get vandalized every day. What's the difference, right? We have a process to deal with that through insurance and what have you. And we will use that same process in this instance. We own the equipment, kind of is what it is. We got to figure it out. So I think, being able to sit down, spend some time with those folks that have those concerns. And, one option after you kind of utilize this report and help clarify maybe some of those technical questions, have a vendor come in, do a lunch and learn, right? And be clear with the vendor. This isn't a sales pitch, but this is a technology demonstration. Run it by legal and procurement. You don't want to end up in a lawyer's office, trust me. But yeah, you can get them in the room, giving folks free lunch always gets folks to show up, and get some of those concerns answered with experts that operate this equipment, on the regular basis.
I don't have too much to add, and then I'll add the second part, but just +1, everything that Shannon said. I mean, a lot of this is just, as we all know, people are a little nervous to try new things, especially I know the maintenance staff is really a concern. Shannon mentioned getting people in the room that have done this, that have implemented these systems. Also getting third parties like, a Resource Refocus or an NBI, or there are plenty of other people. We are not the only ones out there. Having that sort of third party mediator is also really helpful, especially because, I go to a lot of school board meetings and talk to people about this type of work, just to say it can be done, it shall be done. Getting people to go to the physical schools where these are being implemented is really helpful. And we recognize it is hard and there are horror stories. And this is just a really difficult thing to sort of get people over the hump. But, we talked about the Inflation Reduction Act and other funding opportunities that are popping up left and right. The federal government also has the Renew America's Schools. The second round will come out in spring of 2024. There's other local and state tax incentives and different programs that can help fund these. Shannon mentioned the Efficient Healthy Schools program. We help support that for the Department of Energy, and we help do some unique funding research. So if that's of interest and you want that sort of in your court, let us know and just sort of come through the program, and we'll help you out just to figure out what might be in your area. All right, I'm going to add the second part of this. This is such a hard question. I always want an easy answer to this. Like, yes, it's so easy. We just give them this one answer and everyone agrees, but we know we're people and not all people agree every time. But what is your response to individuals that are skeptical of moving towards an all-electric world? This is very aligned with what we've sort of answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway. These folks generally state how expensive electricity is compared to natural gas in certain parts of the country, how we don't have the supply capacity to support everyone moving to all electric, and how utility scale renewables such as wind and solar aren't yet a reliable solution. And I wonder if others, Misha, Alexi, Reese, feel free to chime in here too, but Shannon, if you have an answer, go for it.
Yeah, and again, it's a very common concern. I heard from leadership, well, in 4 more years, gas will be cheaper again anyway. So what's the argument there? And maybe they're right. You can't predict the gas market. So that's kind of the point, though, is you can't predict the gas market. And typically your electrical utility cost, escalation rate is fairly constant. Many locations have public utility commissions that regulate how much that can change on a year-to-year basis. And so the argument that I began to make is that you're actually potentially stabilizing costs, right? And allowing you to be a little more surgical when asking for your annual utility budget versus being like, well, last year my gas budget was this, and then the year before it was double that. So let's shoot in the middle, right? It's kind of a guess. But that's maybe one way to say, look, the electrical grid is stable. And the electrical costs tend to be more stable than on the natural gas side, for instance. One thought there.
Looks like Alexi wants to chime in. Excellent. I was hoping you would.
Yeah, I was just going to echo that last piece, that there has been real volatility in gas costs. Obviously, that's present at the wholesale, but it comes down to the retail level. And it is important to save costs, but it's also important to have predictable costs. Being unable to budget for utility costs, if they're doubling or whatever, going way up and down in a year, is difficult for school districts. So electric costs have been a lot less volatile than gas costs, and a lot of that volatility has been up in the gas costs in the last couple of years. So the capability to be moving to a more predictable cost level, especially if you're doing it in this efficient way, and it's that's why heat pumps are the name of the game, right? 300-ish% efficiency. That reduction in volatility can be really important. So I just wanted to echo what Shannon just said.
Great. This might be for you also, Alexi, or Reese or Misha. Feel free to pop in. But what is the status on the availability of cold climate heat pumps for 100,000 square foot buildings? Plus 100,000 square foot and above. Sorry.
Without knowing, I mean, I don't remember exactly how big you can get cold climate heat pumps now. Generally speaking, they're out there, and there are very large facilities that are using things that you might call heat recovery chillers that are good in cold climates. That when you get up to central systems, those are available too. So generally speaking, it's out there. Sometimes that cold climate system performance comes at a cost premium, generally, and so the systems can run down to 0 or down to negative Fahrenheit conditions with high performance and good efficiency. It just costs more to install. Reese, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think just echoing you, we've seen examples of these systems implemented in and sometimes they are, and I've seen other comments in here, they sometimes come in the form of ground source heat pumps, or definitely that heat recovery option. But yeah, it just comes down to first cost. And I will just note that I think the reason that more of the cold climate or geothermal options didn't show up in this report is just because again, we were kind of tailoring it towards the more milder climate of Southern California, but those technologies do exist, and they're out there, and they have been installed in these larger commercial buildings. But there's a cost premium.
And I'm anticipating some progress on cost compression in geothermal systems. There's a ton of IRA money, for example, ton of federal money going into geothermal in particular, and so that geothermal gets right around that cold climate thing. The ground is relatively warm in the winter, right? And so I expect that's a place to keep an eye on. There's interesting stuff moving in development of geothermal, different approaches, hybrid between vertical and horizontal loop, approaches and improvements in drilling and such. So I think that's a place to keep an eye on. And it's not, you don't want to say, oh, geothermal, we can't afford it, just out of hand, because with some of these federal incentives and other grant projects and the cost compression, I think that's evolved.
Bless you. Great. Good job holding on to that. Okay, we have kind of like an implementation question. So we have a scenario where only the rooftop units need replacement, but not the boiler. Is that still a potential scenario where electrification is possible, or is it necessary to wait until the boiler needs replacing to go all electric?
That's a doable scenario. There are air source heat pump rooftop units, so it would be entirely possible to, assuming the ducting is enough to pull that off and the electrical capacity. There's these sort of site-specific questions you sometimes get into that they're kind of unavoidable with every site. Broadly speaking, it's doable, and it's definitely worth, the key to getting this stuff done at the most optimal cost and keeping performance good is being strategic. And so having a phased electrification plan is not a bad thing. To say, hey, we're gonna do these rooftop units, we've got the budget for that. And it's, as long as that's part of a strategy that's building toward getting to the end goal of decarbonization, fantastic.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to that, which is, if that means that you're electrifying some of your systems, now, as opposed to waiting for being able to do everything at once in 10 years, I think that's, critical to get that. Yeah, again, as long as you have a plan for that kind of phased electrification, I think doing what you can now is always good.
Hopefully that was helpful. If you need more clarification, please put it in the chat. There's one question, so we're running out of time and we have lots of questions. So I am being a little selective, I'm sorry, but we will take a lot of these questions and we can answer them and then post it when we post the report and all that stuff. We've done that in the past because some of these are really interesting questions. But I want to address one of the questions that's actually in the chat, that since the costs you've shown have been adjusted to California, how can we adjust for our area? So I'm going to say one thing, and then I think we've got a few other things this team would like to say. One thing is that obviously costs can be super localized. And if you need or are looking for something like this local to your area, let's talk, because there's an opportunity to do some sort of research project like this for you in your area. We'll need to sort of like understand what that is. But since we have the methodology, it's just a cost research project at this point. Alexi, I know you wanted to say something else as well.
Well, we did make an effort to try to, where possible, sort of tease out the difference between equipment and labor costs. And some of the tables we showed here, those are a single number, low to high, right? So it's combined. But deeper in the guts of the content report, dashboard, et cetera, that we're working on, we can get into some of that. And I don't know, Reese, if you want to mention any details about that difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it can be as easy as just applying like a labor location factor, which you know, groups like RS Means produce and publish, you know, for your area compared to these results, which are again for Southern California. So you know, it's percentage increase or decrease that we're talking about. So the magnitudes I do think still hold, but they're, you know, they may be a little bit higher in Southern California compared to where other folks are at, or lower depending. But so yeah, it's a, again, yeah, we can discuss, you know, putting out a more kind of national average cost, but also again, it's, I think it is, the magnitude still hold true.
All right, so I've been told that our website said this went until 11:30. It actually goes until 11, so I'm gonna wrap up now. Sorry about that confusion if anybody was like, we have 30 more minutes. I did want to address one real quick thing I saw in the Q&A about asking if we were gonna address new construction. Hank, let's talk about that, because new construction is objectively, I say this with a grain of salt, the easy way to go all electric. So I think we should definitely chat after this. So reach out to us. I just put our school's email in the chat. That's a great way to get a hold of all of us on this call. And with that, thank you all so much to the panelists, Alexi for being our special guest at the end, and Susan for running this. And again, thank you to SEE for supporting this research and our methodology. Susan, anything to wrap up?
I will be sending out an email with links to the recording, slides, and other resources following this webinar. Please look for that email tomorrow.
Bye, have a great day.
Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.